The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
They may be drinkers, Robin, but they're also human beings.
Hell yeah, let's get Stinko.
Welcome, Giles and the Goalie Podcast, the show that is guaranteed to be the worst finale you will ever see whenever that day comes. I am your host, Giles Farrell. Next to me is Ben Remington.
Hello.
Ben, did you catch the Game of Thrones finale?
No, but I was on Twitter during it, which is the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why
That goes for this whole season.
If you didn't notice, I was not on Twitter the entire week leading up to and during through the Game of Thrones finale.
Yeah, I can tell you everything that's happened this season in Game of Thrones, and I have not seen a minute of it.
Even when I cut down on followers, I still get all the Game of Thrones updates into my feed. So,
But yeah, the memes are good. I will say that. I mean, because it's such a popular series, and there's been plenty of opportunities for folks to make dank memes for the Game of Thrones. So,
yes, and I will make none because I understand none. So there you go. Yeah. So we are back after a week off, week of rest.
yes.
Week of hibernation. And as expected, there's still relatively no Minnesota Wild news.
Right.
With the lone exception of the small little nugget from Michael Russo of The Athletic that the other part of the Minnesota Wild analytics department, Alex Mandrycky, is stepping aside when her contract runs out in June, at the end of June.
Sure.
So, but she does, from reading through the article, she does get to kind of help bring in a successor in that department. So, which is, I guess it's weird, but also cool.
Like, they're actually going to have an analytics department still?
Yeah.
This confounds me because I don't know that I believe that they ever used the analytics department that they had. And because those were two, I mean, AC Thomas and Alex were, two of the smartest people in hockey analytics. They built War on Ice, which, for folks who never got the pleasure, was a just terrific website for advanced statistics. And so, I don't know. I have been kind of at odds with the whole idea of Wild Analytics for a long time because under Chuck Fletcher and even more so under Paul Fenn, it feels like they were not used often, if at all. Like what analytics department allows the Nino Niederreiter for Victor Rask trade? The answer to that is no analytics departments allow that trade. And obviously Fenn's got the final call, and he's from his background, he's obviously not going to go 100% with what the analytics say. But then why have them around? I guess is my point overall.
I apologize. So in the article it says once they hire somebody, she will help train that person in as her replacement and
it's going to be
transition.
Kevin Fallness with a calculator. That's going to be the analytics department.
And yeah, because we all know Fallness loves computers.
Stats, yeah.
I was more referencing his war on GIFs.
Oh, yeah, that's just silly.
And so basically, also in the article is basically what made her so good in the analytics department is taking, from what it says, taking data and bringing it to life in simplistic yet dynamic ways. So basically, she probably says, for somebody who's seemingly analytically challenged like Paul Fenton, he just gets a list of players and it just says, this player, good. Yeah. This player, bad. Although you might not think that, but he seems to maybe think it's the opposite. There's some kind of reverse psychology going on.
Yeah.
Nino Niederreiter, bad.
Yeah.
Victor Rask, good.
Right. Maybe she was just off with her colorings. Like
maybe there was just a wrong color scheme.
Maybe he was just like, "Oh, this purple seems terrible. What does this purple mean? This purple must be bad."
This red, this means good, right?
Yeah. He was interpreting it as wild colors.
Yeah.
It was just like, "Oh, green. Well, we can't have that.
No.
We need this red player here, this Victor
We
Rask.
need this red back."
Yes.
So yeah, that is the only seemingly nugget of news. Also, as it's not really news, but it got traction last week when Elliot Friedman threw out Jared Spurgeon as being the Wild's best trade asset. But as we know, Jared Spurgeon would like to stay and remain on the Wild. But I did write about that at Zone Coverage. Some teams who might be of interest to acquiring Jared Spurgeon, and so give that a read. But otherwise, it's been crickets.
Yeah, I mean the whole best trade asset thing is kind of funny because it's like, well, I mean, who's a great trade asset? Connor McDavid. He's a great trade asset. you know who's a great trade asset? Mitch Marner or Austin Matthews. They're great trade. I mean, it's all like, yeah, we know he has a ton of value. Like that's and NHL teams have finally kind of come around on realizing Jared Spurgeon's value, which is great. So it's just kind of up to if Paul Fenton somehow gets the right deal. And so, I'm sure there's been a lot of terrible things posted on HF boards in the last couple of weeks. But,
HF boards.
but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. And it sounds like, and I mean, the fact that the team came out, we talked about this immediately after it happened, the post-season press conference where the team flat out came out and said their number one priority is signing him to an extension. So it just kind of goes to show you that they're not screwing around. And if they were shopping him aggressively, I think that their message would have been a little different. They might have used exploring options or some other vague hockey speak terminology like that. Instead, they flat out came out and said, we're going to try to sign him to an extension. And maybe that was, lip service too. Who knows?
The guys over at Evolving Hockey, Evolving Wild, I think they had Jared Spurgeon at just coming in over like $7 million for like 5 years in their contract projections, which is, I believe it's completely fair.
I mean, he's probably worth that.
They do a lot of research into their contract projections. They just don't pull numbers out of thin air like I do.
I 7 for him sounds like a lot, but it's probably not really. I mean, given what he brings to the table, and I also wouldn't be surprised to see him fall under that, just because what he does isn't measurable outside of the very advanced statistics. He's not a big point guy. He's not a big guy. He's not super young anymore, and so I think that there's, it's very possible he falls under that. But that's I would say a very good ceiling as to what his contract would be.
Just a shade under Ryan Suter, so he can't usurp Ryan Suter as being the highest paid defenseman on the team.
That's Suter's rule. It's like old school WCW for those who know. Like Kevin Nash and Scott Hall could basically always had to be the highest paid wrestlers on the roster. Suter's got that same thing.
It's always some kind of dick measuring contest, isn't it?
I mean, sports in general.
That's just what it boils down to.
That's what we signed up for.
All right, and then the Iowa Wild, they bowed out of the AHL playoffs in 6 games to the Chicago Wolves. Fancy that, a Wild going out in the second round to Chicago.
Oh.
No stanchion was involved in this Game 6. But the Iowa Wild season has finally come to an end. Their first playoff appearance, they go into the second round, and then now we're going to kind of run down the prospects list.
Yeah.
Kind of highlighting them since we've got a lot of time to fill.
Right, and also worth mentioning, so, we talked about Cunnin, Donato, and Greenway getting some time in Iowa. Cunnin now Actually, he's moved on to the Worlds. He's, I believe, the one of the few Wild players to move on to the Worlds. So that's cool to see that he's getting a whole lot of high-level hockey experience this spring, which is good. Can only probably bode well for his future. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to run down. I got I got some feedback that it'd be cool to kind of run down the prospects for the Minnesota Wild. I think to kind of start it off with, I don't have any rankings per se, but I'd venture to guess that the Wild's farm system is, depending on how you look at it, middle of the pack at best. I don't think, and as we go through these guys, you'll kind of see why. I think middle of the pack at best, and that's including one Kirill Kaprizov, who is a very good prospect. So I don't know if there's a lot here to get super excited about, but there's a fair amount, I think, to be interested in and to be, excited in a more low-key kind of way, I guess you could say. So anyway, this is kind of my opinion and how I kind of see things, and I'm also giving a little bit of a bump to guys who are closer. So you'll see a couple of Iowa Wild players on here that may raise an eyebrow because you might not think they have a very high ceiling, and that might be the case, but they're very close to playing in the NHL, and I think that's something that should be noted. So, without further ado, to kind of start it off along those lines, number 10, I have Sam Annis. And he might be a guy where, he's always going to be a bottom six guy. But I think that he can fill that role. I think that he is a guy that can play in the NHL. I know he has a lot of fans, for the folks that have covered him. I know good things have been said about him. So this season he did lose a little bit of time due to injury in Iowa, but did manage 38 points in just 60 games. So a pretty solid season out of him. I think he does a lot of things well. He's again, not one of those guys that's going to leap off the page at you. Not one of those guys that's going to be a franchise savior, but I think he's, maybe Kyle Brodziak-esque kind of bottom six center that just does a lot of things well and can score a little bit. He isn't going to, again, blow anybody's doors off, but can score a little bit. So Sam Annis, number 10, just obviously with the Iowa Wild this season. Number 9, I have Louis Belpedio. Another guy that, not going to blow a whole lot of people away, but had a solid season, his first full season in Iowa. He just got done with college last year, spent the whole season with Iowa. Only 21 points, but, he's not a defender that's going to score a lot. He's more of the, the Ryan Suter type defender. I'm not saying he's good as Ryan Suter, but, the biggest thing out of him is he's right-handed. And that, as we've found out by leaps and bounds, is gold.
Yeah, need those.
So it'd be interesting to see if and when he might come up, just because, he could be a guy that's very close just based on the fact, look how long of a run Nate Prosser got. Just basically being one of those reliable type right-handed defenders, you can make a good career out of that. It's like being a reliable left-handed pitcher in baseball. You've really got a lot of options. Number 8 on my list, I had a fan favorite, especially for Giles, play the Rouser. It's Kyle Rau. So Kyle Rau, a guy that probably didn't have a whole lot of fanfare, signed with the Wild, obviously out of your University of Minnesota Golden Gophers. But, had a nice season. Really did. Have 53 points in 69 nice games with Iowa. Had a little cameo there with the big club, notched an assist. I think he's a guy, again, probably a bottom six guy, probably a hustle guy, but a guy who probably, could do well enough on the fourth line. And, again, I kind of gave a little bit of extra bump to the guys really close to the NHL, and I think Kyle Rau is really close to being, I don't want to say an NHL fixture, but I think he could be a guy who spends a lot of time in the NHL and does pretty well with it. So those were 3 Iowa Wild players to start off my top 10. Giles, do you have any questions, comments, concerns on those 3 Iowa Wild guys? You've covered a handful of them in your travels down there. What do you think?
I think going back to Sam Annis, he can be kind of a spark plug, offensively on the fourth line.
Sure.
Instead of rolling out just the grinders who, you just throw a hit and they expect that to charge your team up. Sam Annis is a guy who goes out and he can work hard despite his small frame, and he can maybe generate a little bit of offense in the bottom 6, from a fourth line. That's having depth is key, and as we saw a couple years ago, that was really key for the Wild to be able to roll 4 lines and do well. And I think that's kind of an area he would maybe do good at if he gets a shot, but the Wild seem hell-bent on not giving him that shot. But
yeah, it's amazing to me that he didn't get a cameo this season. I think the injury played into that a little bit, but he had a good year. He had a pretty good year in Iowa. I mean, it wasn't, again, he didn't blow anybody away, but I feel like his opportunity will come soon. Unfortunately, maybe it's not with the Wild, maybe it is with another squad, but I guess we'll see. So, all right, moving on here. So number 7, I am down to one Damien Giroux, a guy that we covered a couple of times in our prospect updates. Currently with the Saginaw Spirit of the OHL. Let's see here. He was a fifth round pick from the Wild in 2018. We talked a lot. I think we mentioned this every time we talk about the draft class this past season. We did like what they did in the later rounds, and Damien Giroux, granted is in the OHL, which is known as a good offensive environment, but 30 goals in 67 games, 51 points overall. A guy that, again, you're going to hear this probably a lot, not a big guy, right around the 5'10", 180-pound mark, but a guy that has a knack for scoring, and so a kind of a speedster type that can play center. So really looking forward, to see where he progresses. He's obviously one of the younger of the Wild prospects, but a very good season, and you can't really argue with those results. He was up there towards the top of the list for Wild farmhands in scoring. Not actually just tied with overall points with one Kirill Kaprizov. Different level of competition, obviously. But so anyway, so that's number 7, Damien Giroux. Number 6, Sean Bedrias, another guy that I covered multiple times. He is one of the proud Wild prospects that played in the Q, which we were correct on. Apparently is a semi-heavy offensive environment. I'd always been subscribing to the theory that it was just the old trap hockey played by the French Canadians up there, but apparently it is more offensive than I had previously thought. But along those lines, he did have a good season. Also, 46 points in just 56 games. He was traded from Gatineau to Cape Breton during the season, so always good when you have a prospect who is wanted enough by another team that they make trades in junior hockey. So Sean Bedrias, another one of the 2018 draft picks. He was a 6th rounder, actually, producing pretty well, all things considered. So, it's always good when you can get 5th and 6th rounders that are producing well, guys. You'd rather have them producing well than not. I mean, if you're going to spend 5th or 6th round picks on guys that have some potential, it's always good when they come out of the gates kind of firing. That first couple of seasons in juniors where they can really kind of put up some points.
it's just those first-round picks you just toss away on defensemen that no one knows about.
Yeah, he may or may not be on this list. We'll see. Opposite of one Damien Giroux, Sean Bedrias is massive. He is 6'5" and weighs in at 216 pounds at age 19, which, as we all know, that number only goes up. So, yeah, he's a big boy, and he uses that size. He's obviously more of the power forward type that we're looking at. So, a guy that is may excite some just because of that size. May and obviously the production kind of goes with it, but very different from from his prospect mate in Damien Giroux. On to number 5, Ivan Lodnia, 3rd round pick from the Wild in 2017. Reputation as a dangler. Reputation as a guy who can really kind of stick handle quite a bit. A guy that can really move the puck around. Not a huge guy, but not small. 6 foot, 190. 45 points in 41 games in the OHL. A little cuts short on the season there, but a guy that I believe he signed his entry-level deal. That was a news story that popped out a couple of weeks ago, I believe, at the end of the season. I think he already signed. So somebody we will see with the Minnesota Wild at some point. Obviously, he can stay in juniors for a little bit of time here still with that entry-level deal signed, but
actually signed his ELC in December of 2017. I was like
really?
you. I thought
he signed
I was
this
looking
year.
this up as you were saying. I was in the same thought that I thought he had just recently signed, but he signed his entry-level deal back under Chuck Fletcher.
Wow. Yeah, for some reason I had thought that he signed recently. All right, well, good thing we have. That's what we have Tony Reale for here to check.
Yeah, fact check.
So anyway, Ladnia, Boudreaux, Giroux, guys all playing juniors right now. Guys that were, Ladnia was a 3rd-round pick, Giroux 5th, Boudreaux 6th. So middle to late round picks. Done pretty well by the Wild drafting staff. Anything you have on any 3 of those guys? Are you particularly excited about any one of them?
I'm looking forward to seeing Ladnia hopefully in Iowa next year.
Sure.
Kind of see how he translate over. I think he's kind of the most fascinating one out of the lot.
Yeah, and he's the one, and I think with all 3 of these guys, these prospects that haven't tasted Iowa just yet, I think we're probably looking at middle 6 type players. I don't think we should get so excited as to think that these are top line type guys. And then it's kind of seems like that's what the Wild, even though they've drafted fairly well, I feel like in the middle of the late rounds lately, I think they've picked up a lot of those type of guys. Which is kind of ironic because that's what the team was largely built of for the last couple of years. You think of the Charlie Coyles, the Nino Niederreiters, the Jason Zuckers, really kind of, Zucker maybe outshine that a little bit, but middle 6 type players, but good middle 6 type players, and depth, as we talked about. Depth along with, the guys I talked about earlier, the Iowa Wild types that are maybe good 4th line guys that you can roll 4 lines with. But yeah, middle 6 type guys. As we get a little bit higher here, there's some guys that maybe have some first line potential, but we'll see. So onward and upward here. Number 4, I have Dmitry Sokolov, who did spend this entire season with the Iowa Wild. Didn't go crazy from a production standpoint, but he's a guy that I think a lot of us were excited. He was talked about being a very, very high pick in the draft that he came out in 2016, ended up a 7th round pick, but has scored in bunches basically everywhere he's gone. This year is the first season that he hasn't scored 30 goals somewhere in North America. So, which is kind of understandable. This is his first time in big boy professional hockey. The AHL, he spent 60 games with the Iowa Wild, 16 goals, 14 assists, 30 points. They've talked about conditioning for him being difficult, and maybe he's not the most fleet of foot player out there. So it could just be a season where he's learning how to play at the pace that the AHL plays at, and he's still fairly young. He's still just 21 years old. So he's a guy that we very well could see a cameo out of at some point. I don't know that it would even be next season. He's still a little young, and he's still a little young, and he's got a little way to go. And maybe I'm just a little optimistic on him, but I see him as, I hate to say it for certain folks, but maybe like a late career Thomas Vanek or Danny Heatley type, where he's not lightning fast, but he's very skilled offensively. He's got a good shot. He's got some good offensive skills around the net. He's not a tiny guy, 6 foot, 209 pounds. So he kind of play a little bit in front of the net, but not crazy impressive from the Iowa Wild. But again, maybe a middle 6 kind of guy with some upside, some offensive upside. I don't know that he's ever been known for his defense, nor maybe will he ever be known for his defense. But a guy that could be interesting, just basically in the offensive end of the ice. So, brings us to top three here. Number three, a guy who just signed. I know just signed with the Minnesota Wild, Alexei Kovanov. And that's a guy that was very exciting. He's up there as far as guys that produced for the Minnesota Wild. He is also in the queue for the Moncton Wildcats, a guy that I covered a couple of times this season. He racked up 74 points this season in 64 games with Moncton, 25 goals, 49 assists. So he really excelled at puck distribution. He's a center. He is from Russia, but he's one of those, crafty Russians that decided to come over and play North American juniors, which I think we're going to see more and more of. I mean, it just makes a lot of sense. It makes them a lot more of a safe draft commodity, I feel like, for NHL teams.
Yeah.
And I feel like that they obviously train and play in Russia until they're 18-ish or so, 17, 18-ish, and then come over here and they learn that North American game, maybe that more gritty, power-based game versus the European game, which tends to play a little bit quicker and a little bit more fluid. So it's interesting to see that kind of happen in juniors, where you're seeing a lot of really elite Russian talent kind of come up through Canadian juniors, and the Wild are fortunate enough to have one here in Alex Kovanov. I'll be interested to see what he does. I don't know that he plays with Iowa this upcoming season. I think he probably spends another year in the queue. He only has spent a season and a half there so far.
Isn't there that weird provision where if you are part of like the Canadian Junior League and you're drafted, you either have to be like playing on the NHL roster or like you can't be sent to the AHL. You have to be like 20 before you can like. I think there's something like that.
You might be right.
So essentially, like it's Minnesota or back to the queue. So probably back to the queue next year, but you never know.
Well, and so along those lines with that provision, we can see it like we saw out of Matt Dumba and even Joel Eriksson Ek, where you get that 10-game window.
Yeah, you get to play him up to like 9 games.
Yeah,
and
so maybe we do see him with the Minnesota Wild. Maybe he does get a little taste of the NHL. I think he's a guy who's certainly talented enough. I talked about a lot of middle six guys being in the Wild farm system, even guys that I haven't mentioned that I felt like were outside of the top 10. A lot of middle six guys. Kovanov is one that he's probably a middle six guy, to be honest. But I think he has the upside to maybe play in a top line. I mean, he was a third-round pick this past year in 2018. I think if you're going to pick anybody off this list not named Kirill Kaprizov to maybe have some top-line upside, Kovanov might be it. I mean, even, maybe even more so than the next guy I'm talking about. So be interesting to see what they do with him now that he has, in fact, signed his ELC with the Wild. That was news right after the season ended. So obviously Paul Fenton drafted this guy. He is now a Fenton guy. He's indoctrinated into the Crazy Pills Paul regime. So anyway, moving on. Number two, a guy, talk about production in the juniors, and you have one Connor DeWar, playing with the Everett Silvertips in the WHL. 81 points this season. 81 points in just 59 games.
seems okay.
Yeah, as the captain as well, captain of the Everett Silvertips. So, a guy that really, really had a fantastic season. Again, another middle-round pick, a third-round pick in 2018 for the Wild, just 19 years old. Again, in all likelihood, he's a little on the smaller side, 5'10", 170. Maybe he's a middle six guy, but with production like that, I mean, that really shows that he has a lot of hockey skill. 36 goals, 45 assists. I think he plays center and wing. So, he really does a little bit of everything. And we had one, Darren Brown, Hockey Wilderness writer that lives out in the Seattle area, say that he went to a junior game and was very impressed by DeWar. I think that Connor DeWar is kind of a diamond in the rough that the Wild managed to land in the third round. I think that he's going to be a guy that, again, maybe a middle six, but a very good middle six guy. I mean, you can't really you can't have enough good second liners on your team. I really don't think that there's a whole lot of people that complain about that. So it'd be interesting to see where his career progresses. Him and Alex Kovanov are it feels like there's tiers here with the Wild. We'll get to number one. But Kovanov and Dewar seem to be kind of their own tier unto themselves. They're kind of the very good domestic prospects. Number 2 and 3 kind of head and shoulders above the rest for the Wild. Honestly, numbers 4 through, criminy 15 to 20, you could really make a case for with the Wild. They've got, again, they've got some good depth. Maybe guys that aren't going to be superstars, but some good depth, and that's how their farm system is kind of built. But you really got to kind of like a guy who puts up 81 points in a season, no matter where it is. And WHL is no joke. That's a very legitimate junior hockey league in Canada and the northwestern U.S. You really can't argue with those results. That's really outstanding. So I'm very excited for Connor Dewar. I'm excited to see where he ends up. If he can, progress even further, if he makes the leap even sooner than maybe some people do at his age and where he was drafted. It's not very common for teenagers that were drafted in the third round to make any kind of jump, but it'd be interested to see if anything like that happens in the next season or two here, just because he is producing so much in the WHL. 81 points this season. Last season, 68 points in 68 games. So he's kind of building a good history. Anyway, so that's 2 through 10. Giles, what do you have any thoughts on Kovanov or Connor Dewar or even Mr. Sokolov down in Iowa?
I'm a little more skeptical on Sokolov at this point. Just one playoff game out of the 11 that Iowa played. He was a casualty of the send-downs from Minnesota.
Sure.
But
yep.
Still not a good look when you get the healthy scratch treatment nonetheless. And then, for the last two that you had mentioned, Kovanov and Dewar, it looks like they did maybe find some gems in there, but we'll see, I guess.
Right. Yep. So last but not least, the guy that we have centered all of our prospect coverage around, the guy that we have hung our hat on all season long, Kirill Kaprizov, obviously the number one prospect for the Minnesota Wild. Another fine season in Russia. He seems to set all sorts of scoring records per his age. And compares very well to, the Alexander Ovechkins, the Yevgeny Kuznetsovs of the world. Just 22 years old, playing in the big boy league in Russia. 57 games, 51 points. So almost at a point per game clip, playing against some very, very good competition. A lot of NHL players in that league. You can certainly make the argument that they're not NHL players anymore. But there is a lot of good talent in the KHL. I don't think that anybody can really argue it. It is the second best league in the world. I think maybe Sweden's SHL comes close, and I'll certainly hear arguments on that. But very good competition, but almost a point per game at a mere 22 years old. Something that like I said, the really elite Russian prospects of our time have also kind of mirrored that kind of production. So, if you're a Minnesota Wild fan, you've known about this guy for a while, and we're just kind of waiting and scouring his Instagram posts for what hat he's wearing and all sorts of ridiculous things like that. So, pretty easy call for the number one prospect for the Minnesota Wild. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on Kaprizov? We've talked about him all season long, and kind of the speculation. I'm a little bit surprised. I always kind of hoped, maybe just more hoping that he would come over early, but that's not going to be the case. He is going to play this season for CSKA Moscow. His contract is up after this season. What do you think? How do you think that goes down?
Well, it's the Wild, so it'll probably go poorly. But
fair.
I found it interesting. The Wild.com had a kind of a banner article on him, and basically somebody was over at the World Championships just asking around, other Russian players like, you mentioned Kuznetsov, Alexander Gorgiev of the New York Rangers. Basically just asking around the Russian team, and basically everybody's saying, yeah, this guy's got NHL skill. Maybe needs another year of polishing, but The Wild really are putting on a full court press here. They probably send him a clipping of the website saying, "Hey, look, you're on our front page.
Right.
You know, check us out." You know, it's kind of a, "Hey, look at us." So it really all comes down to, can you get this guy over here? Because you can probably get some good things from him if he can get over here, but I'm skeptical.
I am too, and it's hard not to be as a Wild fan, as a Minnesota sports fan, because we played this game before. Everyone was very excited about the coming over party for Mikael Granlund, and maybe that didn't quite go as everyone had planned for the first couple of seasons. We kind of saw the same thing with Ricky Rubio, where we were waiting for his European contract to expire as well. I think that it's scary. It's scary in the fact that there's no guarantee that he'll ever come over here. There's no guarantee that if he does come over here that he'll want to play for the Wild. And where the team is at right now kind of amplifies that a little bit, because, I mean, who wants to come over and play for a team that is not really in good shape?
Right.
A team that missed the playoffs fairly handily, a team that doesn't have a very exciting young core for the future. But I will say, I think with the trades that Paul Fenton made, everyone knows I'm not a huge fan of his, but I think at least what he is trying to do, and you can argue his degrees of success on that, but I think what he's trying to do is build a young core around Kaprizov before he even gets here. The Ryan Donatos, the Kevin Fialas, not so much on Victor Rask, but he's at least trying to build up that young core, get all those the 22, 23-year-old guys right around Kaprizov's age, not only to play with him, but to help him feel comfortable as a teammate as well, I think is a part of it. We saw a rift with the Wild, a little bit we heard about back in the day when there was kind of two age groups in the locker room. Well, he's going to want people that he can relate to and kids around his age that he can work with, and also good hockey players around that age. He can't just have anybody. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, what decision he ends up making. But that's just kind of that's going to be the question for the next season. I mean, it's going to, as soon as that KHL season is over in what's it, like March? Well, they have playoffs that go through about April as well. But that's going to be priority number one for the Wild fans and for the Wild front office, quite frankly. I mean, he's going to be the biggest acquisition this team has had since Zach Parise and Ryan Suter. So it's going to be a very big deal.
All right, so on to our Giles and the Goalie mailbag that we will do here to close out the show. We asked this from our podcast Twitter account at JTG Wild Podcast, so that you can follow that if you don't already. But first question from Von Trushinsky. He asks, is Brett Connolly the best target in terms of need and possibly price? And I did look this up here, and yes, I would say, Brett Connolly would be a good kind of middle six range forward for the Wild, but I worry because he had 20, I think it was like 22, 23 goals last year, and 46 points, I believe. I worry somebody's gonna massively overpay, kind of like the Sam Gagner treatment, where he signed kind of a large contract after really having one insane year. And if you can get this guy at the right price, sure, but I get weary of anything over like $2.5 million for anything over 3-ish years, because the Wild don't have a great history with signing third liners or lower in that area. And I'm not saying Brett Connolly fits that same criteria, but this is a guy who really never done anything over 30 points prior to this year, and at age 27 now, I I worry if, that's maybe kind of a one-off-ish season, so I would worry about being the team that massively overpays him. But I do agree that would be a good fit in terms of need. It just, if you get him at, say, the right price.
Yeah, and the Wild don't have a ton of money to throw around. Like, everyone thinks that they cleared out all this hashtag cap space. They really didn't. They really didn't that much. And so they've got enough cap space to re-sign all the RFAs they have, which are quite a few. And, they can probably go out and get a guy or maybe two if they're affordable. And so, like you said, I mean, it turns into, do you want to give a guy like Brett Connolly $4 million a year? It's like, well, if that's your only notable free agent signing, I tend to not really go wild for that. No pun intended.
From Zeke Boyd, any players in the upcoming draft that intrigue you? Yeah, Jack Hughes.
I've heard a lot of buzz, and this is a guy that right when the season ended in the Wild were mocked around picking 11, now 12, of course, because the Blackhawks. Cole Caulfield, I believe it is. He's a guy that it sounds like there's a lot of buzz around him being a good offensive player, and maybe the knock on him is that he's a little bit small. So seeing if he falls to the Wild, which, again, some people have mocked him around there, but I think that there's enough buzz around this guy. I've actually seen him brought up by non-Wild folks on Twitter, which is maybe a little concerning that he'll maybe go in the top 10 instead of at that prime number 12 spot. But he's one that I think would be very interesting if he fell to the Wild, because it sounds like he's maybe a guy that's going to slip because of his size, and maybe shouldn't.
Next question from Serious Mashup. He first wants to know when Baby Rem is going to be among us.
Oh, did I not talk about due dates before this?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think you only did the Facebook share.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Late July. So during the prime...
Smack in the middle of no man's land.
During the prime off-season of hockey, which was not planned but works out rather nice. Late July. So we're gearing up as Giles sits amongst several rockers, a jumper in my basement here. The dog watches over all sorts of baby things. We just sat through a 7-hour class yesterday. We learned all about labor and watched a child being birthed, which is...
Pass.
Yeah. Also watched a C-section.
Pass.
Huge pass. A whole lot of breastfeeding talk, which was kind of fun to giggle at, but it was a long 7 hours. I'll tell you that. So, but a lot of good information, obviously. So, but it's getting very real. It's getting very real. So, yeah, thank you for that.
Can't wait for that 7-hour class.
I've already got he's already got 3 hockey jerseys. So he's good to go.
Quite the collection being built up.
It is. It really is.
Other actual hockey question from Serious Mashup. A year from now, which team will be better off, the Wild or the Senators, or as he calls them, the Fighting Melnicks?
Oh, yeah. Well, so we didn't even talk about this. The one emergency podcast we've done in history was the August firing or quitting, I guess, of Patrick Waugh. And now who is back in the news? Patrick Waugh. Who is interviewing for the Senators head coaching job, which, as people already, you already know, and people have already addressed this, that would be the single greatest thing to happen to the NHL, I believe.
Hi, Brock.
No, Brock's really investigating you there. Patrick Waugh.
Smells my dog.
Patrick Waugh with the Senators. How amazing is that? Like,
that gives new meaning to gasoline on the fire.
On the tire fire. Like, it's just, like, I didn't know his face could get any redder, and it's going to. Like, the Avalanche, say what you want about them.
That's tossing a nuke into Hiroshima.
Oh, my God. Like, talk about, I know Chernobyl's been popular in pop culture recently because of the TV show, but that is just Chernobyl waiting to happen. Like, that is effing amazing. So to answer your question, no, I don't think that the Senators are going to be better off. They're still going to be owned by the same douchebag. They probably will have a much, much worse head coach, if anything.
Yeah, if you like low-event hockey, Patrick Waugh's your guy.
All right. But, yeah, it's just, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the Senators because, I mean, that is a pile of rubble that is going to take a lot of rebuilding. And, the Wild aren't in a great spot either. I'm fully aware of that. But, they're not – it's not wild to think that they could be a playoff team next year. You get a full season of healthy Matt Dumba. I mean, that alone could have got the Wild into the playoffs this year. They lost Matt Dumba for over half a season.
Right.
And so not to undercut how good Matt Dumba is, because he's very good, and people need to recognize that if they don't already. They could make the playoffs next year. I feel like it's not likely, but they could. And the Senators, I mean, I don't know that they make the playoffs this decade, with that ownership. And I mean, hell, they might not even be in Ottawa in 2 years.
From our last question, I should say, from Serious Mashup is, I should answer the question, yes, the Wild will be better off because Ottawa didn't get the first pick.
True, yes.
Which they gave away to Colorado.
Which is hilarious as well.
But, last one from Serious Mashup. How long until Leopold ends the Fenton saga? Which prompted a response from our friend Brian Reynolds, who said, damn fine question. But I think I'll still be quite a few years before you see any kind of a change. Like,
yeah,
at least another 3. You could maybe another 2 if it's like an unmitigated disaster and moves just get worse, but I don't see it, being any less than 3.
Yeah, I think he goes another, I would say 2 seasons at the very least. And I think the only way he gets fired in after this season or in 2 seasons is if he completely screws the pooch on the Kirill Kaprizov situation. Because I think that's big enough of a deal to where if he, loses his leverage, what leverage he does have, little leverage he does have, I think if he screws that up and the team looks bleak and I think that there could possibly a change be made, but I really doubt it. I'm with you. I think it's going to be 3 more years at the minimum, unless he basically burns the Excel to the ground with this team's play. So, we all know Leopold wants to win, and maybe if they don't make the playoffs for 3 straight seasons, maybe that is enough for an early hook for Paul Fenton. But I think if they have Kirill Kaprizov in tow, I think that cures a lot of ills.
We missed our calling yesterday. It was the 20th anniversary of Tom Reed's Hockey
Oh,
City
I know.
Pub,
I saw the tweet about that, and I was too
Coach
busy.
Boudreau was there.
Yeah, I was too busy watching birthing videos. Yeah. Learning about colostrum.
Yeah. We missed our chance to ask him to be wedding officiant. Could have gotten you off the hook. Last question comes from in a world where the Wild deal Spurgeon of the Leafs, what do you think is a reasonable return for the right-hander? He asked, Bracco, Kapanen, Nylander. And I kind of briefly looked at Toronto in my Jared Spurgeon article on Zone Coverage,
sure.
Kind of highlighting Toronto as one of the teams who badly need a guy atop their defensive depth chart on the right side. But the key here is Toronto kind of has to work around without their first round pick this year. They have, 2020, 2021, but they gave their 2019 first rounder to the Kings in the Jake Muzzin trade. And so you're basically, looking at trying to trade with Toronto for forward at least, and then a prize prospect. And if I'm Paul Fenton, I'd start the bidding at asking on Nylander and Kapanen. Like, Jared Spurgeon doesn't want to go, so you have to, like, hit a home run on that trade if, somebody has to blow you away with an offer. So I would say you have to have both, and especially, I think it's Kapanen is he right? Yep, he's a right shot.
Nice.
Boy, you needed right shots. And William Nylander at $6.9 million cap hit for the next, what is that, 5 years?
Yeah.
That kind of frightens me a little bit, given his play at at the end of this last year.
Mhm.
But he's still very, very good. I think a lot of it was just from the holdout and the fallout and joining season, mid rush. But I would start my offer there and kind of see where it goes.
Yeah.
Also, Nylander, another right shot. So
Nice.
2 right shots. Move on up.
Desperately need. I don't know. I've seen a lot of people talk about William Nylander, and it's like, I don't buy it. I don't think that's a trade that's going to happen. Is it a viable trade? Possibly, yeah, for the right teams. Is it a trade that makes a little bit of sense for both teams? Sure, you could make that argument. But I for whatever reason, I just don't see it happening. Like, I just don't see the Wild, even for Jared Spurgeon, commanding a guy. I think Nylander's got a lot of value. Because like you said, he had a rough season. And again, yeah, I agree with you. The holdout probably had a lot to do with that, but very, very talented player, incredibly talented player, and I don't think that that's lost on a lot of people. So I don't know. I mean, it'd be nice, and it certainly would shake up this roster in a way that you might feel good about it. Like I mentioned before, kind of building around Kirill Kaprizov, kind of surrounding him with a bunch of early 20-year-old talent that is very good. But maybe it's just the we can't have nice things skeptic in me, but I just don't see it happening. And I don't know. Unless you're going to get that for Spurgeon, I don't want to see Spurgeon dealt, but I just don't know that they're going to get that for Spurgeon.
Yeah, I don't either, and that kind of worries me because you're going to get something less than value for Jared Spurgeon.
And don't do it. Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Well, history suggests that that might not be the case with that general manager.
That's fair. Very fair.
Yeah. So that is the mailbag for this week. Thank you to everyone for sending in your questions. I don't know if I'm forgetting something. We can probably just call it there.
Yeah, that could probably do it. I don't think there's been any. We can finish the show. How much time do we have?
A few minutes.
Okay, so we've talked about the many Batmans before.
Oh, no.
Recently announced Robert Pattinson Batman. At first, I think your reaction to it was very fair. There were some expletives in there.
There's
but
also some alcohol in there.
Fair. But what do you think? I mean, do you think that do you think it's a high risk, high reward kind of hire? Do you think
Yes.
it's okay?
That is perfect. High risk, high reward, and I haven't seen like Robert Pattinson movies since Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire.
Cedric Diggory?
I somehow sidestepped all around the Twilight
Oh,
series.
good for you. Good for
I
you.
haven't seen his indie films that he's been doing, which kind of reading up on, it sounds like he's been magnificent in. So
Okay.
that kind of changed my tune a little bit, and I'm going to try to give it a shot. Whereas I was appalled with Ben Affleck, which, was bad.
Yeah.
So it can't get as bad as that again, I don't think. You can't do that bad with Batman, so I'm giving him a chance, and wherever he falls in the rankings, we'll see for a future podcast. But I am not as down on it as you'd maybe think I would be.
My concern for it is the believability factor, where it's like, they already did damage to that, obviously, with like George Clooney and I guess just him basically. But Ben Affleck, say what you want about him, but he does have some rugged handsomeness to him that you would associate with Bruce Wayne.
Mm-hmm.
Robert Pattinson, not a bad-looking guy, but I think the thing for me that puts me on the negative end of the spectrum is Batman is an ass kicker. Like, he is a martial arts expert. He's a very strong guy, mentally and physically. Christian Bale kind of looks that part. He's built, athletically. I think my thing with Robert Pattinson is he's kind of twiggish. Like, I don't believe that Robert Pattinson can kick my ass. So maybe that's where I'm lost on it. Is he good looking? Sure, and he's lots of ladies are going to swoon for him, and I understand that that's part of Bruce Wayne, and he could play a trust fund baby with the best of them. I believe that, but as far as playing Batman, like, you have to have at least an iota of badass to you. That's where I think Ben Affleck kind of fell flat a little bit, because nobody believes Ben Affleck is a badass because he's kind of a bumbling idiot.
He filled the part of Bruce Wayne a lot better than he did of Batman.
Right.
Which
exactly. And
really fell off a cliff.
Yeah, and so that's kind of where I'm at with Robert Pattinson. Not that I'm, the Batman peers that you are maybe, but but I'm with you with the concern where it's like, if he puts on the bat suit and it's this like skinny metrosexual sparkling vampire thing, I don't know that that's going to go over well.
If his face is as pale as it was in Twilight, then we got some problems.
Yeah, but it's it's like, not that every Batman has been like this hulking, bodybuilder,
right.
But Robert Pattinson is just like, what's he, $140 soaking wet? I don't know. I don't know if I buy it.
For the record, Jamie was appalled at and said Chris Pratt should have been Batman.
That would have been good. I would have liked that a lot. Completely honestly.
No, I'll let her know you agreed.
Yeah, I'm on her side.
Yeah, we'll see where that goes. There's a petition floating around about removing him from the role already. So if you're just
isn't there a petition for?
Yeah,
there isn't a petition to end our show, which I'm a little bit disappointed in. Somebody needs to get on that.
Yeah, we'll see that next week.
Right.
Yeah. We can wrap it up there. Thank you for checking in with us this week. Check this show out on iTunes, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, all that fun stuff. Ben and I are on Twitter at Ben Remington, at Giles Farrell. Again, podcast Twitter is at GATG Wild Podcast, and you can find the written content over at zonecoverage.com/wild. So we will wrap it up for this week, and we will talk to you again next week.
Later.
It's not resiliency. You're making it sound like we're good. That's all. I'm done.